live. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Agent Economy. My name is Chris Grimsey. A bit of background on myself. I've been working in the technology industry for a number of years, both at large organizations like Adobe and Google, as well as smaller startups, kind of Series A to Series C. I'm now the founder of Blackbird, which is a technology and service company helping brands improve their visibility across AI search. And my co-host, Stephen, over to you.
Really pleased to be here with you on the Agent Economy. My name's Stephen. I'm the founder of a firm called LMO7. We're an agency helping brands figure out how to win in the agentic space. I've spent the last 20 years working for brands on the client side, doing e-commerce and Amazon things. Big brands like Unilever, Lego, and Mars most recently. And excited to be here to talk about all things AI and agentic.
Awesome. Good stuff. So a bit of background on the agent economy. I think there's a lot of news, a lot of updates around artificial intelligence, agentic AI, the impacts on marketing. What myself and Stephen wanted to do is bring together a lot of those insights and make them digestible for the audience, but also bring it back to marketing and what is the fundamental impact of some of these changes in the AI landscape and what is the downstream impact which is affecting places like search, agentic commerce, and really helping brands navigate this new landscape. So for episode 1, the agent economy, and we thought about how to kind of label this, but really the reason we called it the agent economy is we're seeing this direction of travel towards agentic, whether it's agentic commerce or just agents within organizations. For us, we're thinking of a catchy tagline. We came up with where the next billion consumers, workers, and decision makers are machines. And we're starting to see this already in the industry with the adoption of some of the technologies and the agentic workflows that are available today. I think a key thing that we're seeing is that right now, the models, the agents are in their infancy, but they're only going to get smarter and faster over time. So we'll be talking about that as we go through the episodes of 2026 and beyond. So enough rambling, onto what we're going to cover today. So we want to split these into 2 areas. And this will be the format going forward. First of all, a bit of detail around like updated news in the AI space. We've got some few updates for you. One in particular on Claude, the other on the recent raise from OpenAI, which happened yesterday, and then a little bit of context around some of the tech layoffs and some of the information you would have heard in the industry recently. And then we'll move into industry news, which is obviously myself and Stephen's specialty, really taking that AI news and doubling down and making it applicable and digestible in the marketing space and some of the changes that are happening there. So we'll be covering Amazon, Shopify, and then AI search, which is an area we're deep in currently. So great, to get started, Anthropic. So winning the enterprise, you would have seen a lot within LinkedIn. I know myself as a user, I'm seeing constant posts. I'm posting about Claude frequently. I'm using it extensively within my business. But what you see here is the adoption rate. So this was a study done by Ramp AI Index, showing the adoption rate of the models over time. What we're starting to see is a drop-off on OpenAI's side and Anthropic seeing this exponential growth. In particular, over the last 4 to 5 months, that kind of line has jumped massively.
Chris,
So, go ahead.
A couple of interesting things in here, right? So also avid user of Claude and, speak to loads of people, and I'm always banging on about how good it is and how it can do a fantastic job of manipulating spreadsheets, building PowerPoint presentations, but also connecting APIs and bringing in lots of different data sources. And I do think it's really good for that. And there's some interesting use cases we should probably talk about as well. But interesting here, right, is that this is the share of US businesses with paid subscriptions to AI models, platforms, and tools. And so I think super interesting to see it from a business perspective, thinking about who uses these tools for internal workflows. But from a consumer perspective, from like end users, individuals using these tools in their daily lives, I think probably the picture is quite different, right? In the sense that OpenAI and ChatGPT so far across all the models with 900 million weekly users worldwide. And I don't think Anthropic or Claude is getting the same level of traction at the consumer level, which makes sense because it's much more of a, let's say, a business tool, right? And then my bet is probably from a consumer point of view that OpenAI do a great job with ChatGPT and its distribution. I think Google will smash it with Gemini, or the evolution of Gemini into AI overviews and all the other different places that they're putting the sort of AI capability within their existing network. And then I don't know about Anthropic and Claude, whether it has like a breakthrough to lots of consumers using it, or whether it stays as something that is a workhorse type tool that gets used inside of businesses. I think that's still TBC, but that ramp from January is hard.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And there's a lot of noise in the industry around why has this been obviously so successful over the last couple of months. People saying, was it the Super Bowl effect? Obviously, you saw the ads taking shots at OpenAI. Was it what's happening between them and the US government? My thinking is that it's less about that and it's more about the modeling capabilities. And we can talk about use cases, but within my own business, using stuff like co-work, the Opus model is like by far above and beyond what I've seen before. So the capabilities have just gone on this exponential growth, and the usability of it from an enterprise standpoint is just huge. So I think it's
Yeah,
less about the noise in the market.
I totally agree. And I remember back in the early days of my career, someone told me that consumers will change their behavior if something is twice as good for the same price, or it's the same as the existing product but half the price, right? And I think what we see here is the advancement of these tools. When Claude brought out the new model, like it was 2x better than, way more than 2x better than what you're getting from ChatGPT, and started using it. So I'm with you. It's more about the utility of the tool than it is about probably the politics and the advertising around the edges. For sure, some going to be some people who decide which tool to use because of those things, but the big shifts that's happening is definitely driven by utility. And then what kind of gets me excited is, I've been playing around with these tools for quite some time now. I've seen some step changes in the quality of them. 12 months time, I don't know how much of this stuff is going to just all be done by AI. And part of that is, I'm excited about, and the other part I'm slightly concerned for humanity. But let's see. I'm sure we'll figure it out.
Yeah, the latest model's impending, right? Is it called Mythos, the latest? And there's some early indications that the model is, leaked. Sure. Early indications that the model capabilities are just like taken Opus and just gone crazy higher. So I'm with you. I'm like super excited. It's like Apple launches back in the day, right? You get excited about the launches. Now the launch is no longer 6 months, it's like 3 months. Then you get recursive learning where the AI models are training their own models. We're going to end up with like daily releases, which is pretty wild.
Sure. Yeah.
It's exciting to watch and be a part of. I did see something funny about Katy Perry. She tweeted, I don't know whether you saw it.
I
She
don't follow Katie.
tweeted a screenshot of her signing up to an annual plan of Claude.
Really?
It might be the Katy Perry effect. We don't know.
I wonder how much she got paid for that.
Yeah, quite a few million, I imagine. Awesome.
Maybe she got a referral code or something to, any clicks through that then led to subscription she got cut off, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the growth is amazing. It might be worth talking through some use cases because we obviously both use it within our own business. For me personally, I made the transition recently from ChatGPT to Claude. And part of it was a guy within Blackbird, one of the team members, uses Claude extensively and said, listen, you move away from like a Q&A style chat to actually being able to utilize the technology to carry out workloads for you. So adopting things like projects, utilizing co-work, which now use the desktop app, scheduling tasks. I've been able to move from like Q&A style to then implementation to actually giving them a very clear brief and getting them to activate those tasks and workloads and projects. So for me, it's really the efficiency side of things and getting shit done basically is
Yeah, absolutely. And on that, the co-work front, so totally with you on scheduled tasks and also projects as well. So, having information in a project so that you're not kind of having to go back to the chat every time and re-explain things to it, or forgetting about things that you'd spoken to about previously. And a couple of interesting use cases I've set up recently. One is to go through, so very boring part of having a business is doing invoice reconciliation, and I use a piece of software called Xero. A lot of emails come to me with invoices on, and you have to somehow get them into Xero. So there's already some optimization you could do with workflows or auto forwarding emails with invoices through to HubDoc and then getting those to sync with Xero. So had that set up already, but now run a weekly task with Claude where it just uses the Xero API and goes and checks what invoices are missing from reconciliation and then can even go into my inbox, find those invoices, download them for me, and then I am uploading them at the moment, but I think I can probably close the loop and do the whole thing. So that's been pretty sweet. I've also got a bunch of different APIs connected into my Claude. So I have Bright Data connected, means I can do web scraping. I do quite a lot of work with brands on Amazon, so really helpful to be able to scrape PDPs and see what titles and bullets are live on the Amazon retail site, especially if we've tried to push through some changes. So that's been really neat. And then one that I actually just worked on today because I listened to a podcast this morning and it was a guy talking about health data. And I've got an Aura ring and I do a bunch of stuff where I post things on Strava with fitness. And I've now connected my Strava API and my Aura API and have 5 years worth of health data now pulling into one dashboard that I can look at and analyze. I'm not sure actually at this point in time what I should do with it, but the data's there for me to try and figure out maybe how I can get fitter. I'm not sure, but that's tons of interesting stuff that you can do with Claude. And I think maybe the big unlock as well as the co-work piece is if you can figure out how to connect to these APIs, and it's not that difficult to figure out, but if you can do some API connections, then it really just extends the reach of and the power of Claude, and you can start to do lots and lots of different tasks on a recurring basis. And I think that for me is something that's probably going to be a bit of a game changer for small businesses or scale up businesses like ours.
Yeah, 100%. I like the fact your world is blurring into your own personal life with Claude as well. So you're probably going to end up with a hell of a lot of different connectors, both business ready and personal.
Yeah, I was trying actually for a long time. Well, I say for a long time, for the last couple of months, I was trying to keep ChatGPT as like my personal AI. So that's where I'd ask it, stupid questions like, when did the Roman Empire fall? What's this answer this maths question that my daughter needed to answer for her homework? And then Claude would be like the date, like the actual work AI. And I was trying to keep those two things separate. But you're right. I think that they might be sort of slightly merging together now with what I've just done recently with the APIs on Aura and Strava. But I think I want to keep them separate, ideally. So I have like a personal home AI and I have like a work AI would be, I think, the ideal setup. But one funny thing that I've been doing lately is up until like a week ago, the voice recording or the voice dictation into Claude wasn't very good. So I'd always voice dictate stuff into ChatGPT and get it to make the prompts that I then put into Claude. So I think Claude thought I was really clever because I always put like really good prompts in it, whereas all of the rubbish noise coming out of my head was going directly into ChatGPT. But I actually just saw, I think it was like maybe in the last couple of days, the voice dictation on Claude just got real good. So now I'm using that. And if you're not, I actually think that's a really easy way to improve your productivity of just like speaking into the model and asking it the question rather than having to type it out. We didn't untap mute there.
I moved into dictation now. So I now speak directly to Claude. It just speeds up my thoughts. I often ramble, as you can probably tell. So it actually cuts out some of the junk and just goes straight to the point. And obviously it's super fast, super quick models. That's been a game changer. I use it for a lot of mundane tasks, like you said, that kind of take a lot of time, but we can also build as well. So I'm not a native coder, so using co-work and being able to use that alongside and in conjunction with code has been a game changer, just developing technology as well. So what would historically take developers, engineers to kind of get technology off the ground, you can now kind of prompt. It's not a one-shot prompt. There's a lot of people have been talking about it. It does require some logic, but you can go from ideation to technology quite fast now. So the barriers to entry have fallen, which is great. Cool. Moving on. So Anthropic, we covered and use cases. I think comparing Anthropic and OpenAI, obviously you would have seen yesterday the latest funding round. It was the largest funding round in the private markets period, 122 billion, which is wild to think about. So Mr. Sam Altman's been on a bit of a crusade over the last couple of months getting investors. I think the valuation, post-money valuation's up at like 800, 900 billion. So fast approaching that $1 trillion valuation, which is pretty wild. Like we mentioned, ChatGPT, it's almost a verb, right? You think back in the day, just Google it. People are now talking about ChatGPT, just ChatGPT it. They've really gone after the
I heard the other day on a podcast, someone said that apparently the kids are calling it Chatty. I hadn't heard that, but apparently that's the nickname that's sticking is just Ask Chatty. So we'll see in a couple of months' time if it's still around.
There's I've seen other verbiage thrown around it, but Chatty, I like it. God knows what I'll be calling it in the future, but They've obviously, as we mentioned, they've gone completely after the B2C market. They do have a lot of reoccurring revenue within that enterprise space, but that's been eaten away by Anthropic over the last few months. They're definitely going to double down on code and really look to kind of gain that market traction again with the enterprises. The B2C market's hard, right? It's difficult to monetize, which is why they're exploring things like agentic commerce, ads, which we have some initial stats on that already. I think they reached 100 million in ARR in under 6 weeks. So there's appetite there. I think the entry point for ads is pretty high, like 200K monthly commitments, $60 CPM. So it's punchy, but it's rife for advertising, right? It's direct to consumer. It's right in the heart of discovery, comparisons, and purchase. So it's a great space to be in.
For sure. I was just doing the maths on the subscription rates. So, like of that, so they got like 900 million weekly users, only 50 million subscribers. So it's like I should have been able to do that maths, but it's like 5.5% of the usage base is paying. They're definitely going to have to find a way to monetize with ads, and that's exactly what they're doing. We've seen that, like you said, Chris. I heard some interesting things on the ads because you're right, at the beginning it was basically like only big advertisers who could test it out, and the minimums are really high. I've heard those minimums are falling quite quickly, so they're obviously trying to reach out to a broader range of advertisers. And right now those placements, they're appearing at the bottom of chat. We talked to a lot of people about advertising inside of a conversation with ChatGPT. They're like, nah, that's not going to work because it'll just break the trust and then I'm not going to use the platform. Well, the ads are going to be well marked in the same way that when Google started introducing ads, they put them at the top of search, but they'd mark them as sponsored so that you in theory knew that they were a paid placement. And so the same thing will happen on ChatGPT, or is happening on ChatGPT. They're banner ads, they appear at the bottom of the chat, so they're not actually interrupting the answer, they're coming after it. But my guess is that when it goes mainstream, because at the moment it's still really in pilot phase, but when it goes mainstream, these ads should work really well, because if you have ever asked ChatGPT to describe you, and if assuming you're a heavy user of it, its description is scarily accurate because it knows so much about you from all the different questions and queries that you pumped into it. So as a result, those ads are going to be able to be super targeted. And if they're super targeted, they should convert really well, and that should bring a load of ad dollars to them. So I personally am pretty bullish on ChatGPT's ad, let's say, revenue generation. I think it's going to scale quite quickly over the next 6 to 12 months. But really interestingly, like we talked about on the previous slide, Anthropic absolutely not doing that, or certainly they're saying their stall out, that they're not going to go anywhere near ads. And I think it can be true that those two strategies both work. Co-work and Claude with co-work is really focused on utility, whereas ChatGPT is really focused on like scale and reaching all of the consumers worldwide and giving them a free option to use their platform. I think that those both things can work at the same time. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to see what kind of ad placements, what kind of brands start to really pile into ChatGPT. And at the beginning, let's say distribution, when the inventory is like a reasonable supply level and the number of brands who are using it is potentially not as high, I think the cost is going to come down, and the ROI will be helpful in that respect as well. So yeah, should be a good place to put ads over the next 6 to 12 months, I think.
So yeah, the initial market, right, was the US market. So they're going to have to reflect changes to the pricing model based on other regions. So I think the cost of entry is going to be lower in the European market, the Asian market, for example. So yeah, super interesting time. We've obviously worked in the advertising space for a number of years, and the old adage of right person, right time, right creative, et cetera, it's never really played out like that within advertising. But I think for the first time with OpenAI, with ChatGPT ads, you're getting very close to that. So yeah, it's going to be super exciting. I'm very bullish on it as well. So let's see what they do, and also what Google does, right?
Yeah,
they're obviously
yeah,
looking
exactly.
to protect a $250 billion advertising product. So as they eventually adapt into AI mode, which is inevitable, or some version of that, which combines web guide, AI overviews, AI mode, what does advertising look like in that world? So there's obviously a lot of eyes on it within Google. They need to make sure it works because, yeah, like I say, that's the gravy train within Google, right? The advertising arm.
Absolutely. And a couple of things. So I know that already you said, the cost of entry will be potentially lower across Europe and other places. So in Europe, via Criteo, you can get access now for 50K a month minimum. And it's definitely going to come down further, I think. So for sure, it'll become more and more accessible. I guess what's interesting on the Google side is whilst they haven't put those ad placements in there yet, they have all of the knowledge, infrastructure, capability, user platform for ad buyers. It's already there, ready to go. So it's just a case of piping the ads into these new placements. Whereas GPT just need to build all of that infrastructure, right? That's a big job for them to do. And I think it'll take them a bit of time, but I'd be very surprised if we don't see some pretty tasty ad placements through the Google network, which are just served in exactly the same console that you buy PPC and display ads today.
Yeah, makes sense. I think another key thing here is, and you mentioned it, the ad themselves, they can't be within the Q&A style chat because users are going to lose trust. They're ultimately going to shift to another model which doesn't do that. So having it below the fold or below the actual answer itself is going to be key. That puts increasing importance on being part of the answer initially and then supporting that with advertising. So it's definitely a combination. We're kind of going back to like organic and paid. It's going to be key going forward that you're at least considered and visible within that answer and then supporting that with advertising.
Yeah, totally. And I think the opportunity right now, without going into like a hard sales pitch for both our businesses, is to get involved in the organic side of things, right? Because if you learn how to win organically, or not necessarily win organically, but if you learn how to present your brand in the best way possible organically, then it's going to put you in a really good starting point for when paid becomes the opportunity. Now, I do think for some brands, they'll probably not act quickly for a number of different reasons. And then they'll just pivot to the paid option when it comes later. So if they don't have the visibility, you'll just pay to play, which is kind of how it's worked in a bunch of other digital marketing evolutions we've seen through the years, like Google PPC in the early days, like social and paid social, like retail media with Amazon as well. It starts off organic, then it becomes a paid opportunity. I think the brands who do things best are the ones that own really strong footprint in organic, and then also layer the ads on top. But for sure, there'll be some brands that just decide that's too much work, and they'll just pay to play when that opportunity arises in front of them.
Pay those punchy CPMs and CPCs, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, I did see some data saying were they more efficient than Google Display Ads and less than Meta? I can't remember which way around it was, but there was a comparison between the two. I don't think it was it wasn't wildly expensive, even though it seemed like a fairly high CPM threshold at the beginning. But actually, the CPAs were in the ballpark, I think.
Yeah, makes sense. I think they're just much more qualified consumers. So I think the conversion is going to be much higher. They're just more qualified. They've obviously done the research within these answer engines and then at a point of purchase. So it makes sense. I mean, the CPM's punchy, but I think they can warrant it based on the ecosystem that the consumers are living in. So
Exactly.
let's see. Cool. So I thought about putting this in and not putting this in. Didn't want it to seem doom and gloom, but there is a lot of swirl within the industry around tech layoffs. I think what's starting to come to fruition is that it's not necessarily all about AI. And what we're talking about here, you may have seen it in the industry that Block, I think they cut around 4,000 employees within their organization. This was a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah,
And then
which
Oracle
I
cut.
think that whilst it wasn't it's not a big number. I think the interesting thing there was it was like half of the workforce, right? So like so it's only 4,000 people, which doesn't sound big in the grand scheme of things, but they only have like 8,000 in total, so they've chopped it in half, which is kind of wild. But then when you think about what Musk did when he took over Twitter, I mean, he collapsed it by like 90%. So I think that set like the sort of not the tone, but like it's possible actually to run these organizations a lot leaner than they have been run,
Yeah.
regardless of AI or not, I think, which is maybe the point of discussion here now. And so a lot of these larger organizations like Oracle now following through on that, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I think the key thing we wanted to get across here is that AI is part of the rationale why this is happening. However, there are other elements that are at play. So in the case of Oracle, in particular, the early numbers were 10,000 cuts as of this week, but it's looking likely to be more like 30,000 across the organization. The reason for this is one, they were probably bloated to start with, but also they're making significant investments in AI infrastructure and cloud. So a lot of the cuts are being used to save money to reinvest in AI. So there's a few things at play here. So AI being one of them, but I think it's important for people to understand in the industry that there's other areas, and we'll cover these. But another area is overhiring during COVID. And I saw this myself. And it was kind of the tech boom, right? People were at home. For the technology industry, there was a lot of people with more capital, more cash. They were obviously purchasing more online. So it was kind of a perfect storm, really. From there, just brands went crazy and just hired aggressively to meet that demand. So really what part of this is a correction in that headcount. They've hired very aggressively over a 4 year period, and now it's really a market correction that we're seeing. The other thing to consider is that during COVID there was low interest rates. The interest rates went down to zero, so the cost of capital was very cheap. That now has changed, and the costs are rising across the board. So again, a correction is required there for the organizations. And then from the AI standpoint, I think is definitely the third part of the pie. Is that organizations are needing flatter structures to deploy AI successfully. Whereas before, and obviously I'm ex-Google, you would have huge organizations with mid managers across the board, large complex organizations. In the world of AI, that is impossible to deploy. You cannot deploy technology with those type of org structures. So a flatter, leaner structure is required. So there's definitely been a correction or an adjustment, in the market as brands are thinking about how do we deploy AI successfully going forward and reduce that complexity. Reducing that complexity is just flat structures and having agentic AI workflows in place.
Chris, I saw this really interesting article the other day that was talking about this topic of org structure. And I'm totally with you, right, in this sort of cycle of there was low interest rates for a long time, actually, but then even lower through COVID, which just meant easy access to the capital, and then this huge hiring boom, which now absolutely just needs to be corrected for. But the point around the org structure is a really interesting one, because the article that I was reading was talking about the need for, like, why do we have structures with so many layers of management? And actually, in really large organizations, the communication of ideas, the communication of programs, the communication of direction that's given needs people to be able to do that communication, right? It's really difficult to do those things at scale without having layers and layers of management. And to the one point, deploying AI gets really complicated if you've got these huge structures and layers in place. But also, AI actually could really help with the communication across the organization to make sure that the right people know about the right things that are happening across the different parts of the businesses. And then, you don't need those, let's say, gatekeepers of information, those middle managers who would, essentially not doing any of the work, but actually doing the communication between the different parts of the organization. That actually could get outsourced quite heavily to AI. I've been in those roles. I've played that role of being coordinating communication. Some of it's politics, some of it's just absolutely, passing information back and forth between teams. And it's an important role to play, but if it can be done by AI and it can be done more efficiently without a human in the loop, I actually think that's a great bit of progress for large organizations. They're doing it in the tech space now. They normally, or can be, first to go on this stuff. When does it come to everyone else? Like, how long is it going to take for the large, let's say a Mars or a Unilever, places where I've worked before, how long is it going to take for them to recut their organizations? And I think it'll take quite a while longer. So at least 2 or 3 years out from now before any of this stuff comes to those large organizations, in my.
Yeah, I agree. And I've seen it with a few of the companies I'm working with already, that they have limits on access to AI. So certain employees or certain divisions will be granted access to the latest models. Others, they're locked down because potentially there's security risks or they're too powerful. The interesting dynamic is when you get a superstar join your organization that has built 50 agents, almost like bring your own agent to the workplace, and they are just X in terms of efficiencies. It's going to be wild.
Totally. It reminds me of like when I first started out my career, and there'd be people who could write Excel macros, and they were like they were like the gods of work, because they could automate all of this stuff. And I think the same thing's going to be true. Yeah, exactly. The same thing's going to be true now, which is going to be like, hey, if you know how to deploy an agent, or you have like a workflow in mind that can automatically run big loops of work, whatever it might be, then you're going to be quite valuable. I also think there'll be a whole industry of people who know how to do this stuff, who won't let on that they can do it, who will go and join organizations and then get paid X salary and just reduce the amount of work they do to, like, 1 day a week, just because they can, they've automated the whole thing. And that will already be happening somewhere.
100%. It came up actually with it was my financial advisor. He was chatting to one of his friends and said, um, his friend was basically like, I'm bored. I do all my work in the first hour of the day, and I have the rest of the day to do whatever I need, play golf, whatever it may be. My manager has no idea, but I just use AI just to generate and automate everything. It's like, Jesus, okay, fair play.
Yeah, I love that. And I think probably the companies that I would say, like, not a risk is the wrong word, but the companies where that probably happens is like small to mid-size, right? So small to mid-size where let's say, like, not the regulation, but the controls are a bit laxer, which is it was good and bad, because it means that they can start moving with this stuff quicker. But I think in those organizations, you'll find people playing that game quite quickly. Whereas in a larger organization, I think, a lot of the activities heavily tracked. And I certainly remember at Mars, there was a situation where we were allowed to use external tools, but you absolutely couldn't put any company private information into those tools, understandably. And I remember that someone did, and it was flagged by IT. So actually, you were keeping an eye on this stuff. So, like, they were noting, when you're in a browser, when you're using ChatGPT, what were you putting into ChatGPT? And I think for a lot of people, that might be slightly uncomfortable, thinking that they're tracking absolutely everything that you're doing. But it's true, they will be at the large organizations. And so you definitely need to be very careful if you work at one of those and only use the authorized tools. But I think, small, mid caps, it's on the one hand, like, great for them. They can just, like, deploy Claude to everyone in the team and let them run wild. But on the other hand, potentially loads of issues that might come on the personnel side. But also, I think there's something else that could happen in the short term, which is if everyone gets permissioned in an organization to use Claude and co-work and code or whatever, and then starts vibing loads of small apps, which is a good thing to do and can increase efficiency. I think that what they might end up doing is building a load of technical debt for themselves. So build all these cool customized apps, which maybe solve a problem in the short term, speed up a work process, get rid of some manual data entry. But that person will leave. They'll go to another role. They'll forget how it was vibed. Like, it won't have there's no documentation that's built around it that explains how it works. And then the company will be stuck with this, like, terribly vibed app that they'll then have to figure out how to repurpose and, like, turn into enterprise grade to get it to continue to work. So there's probably a business in just going around and, like, converting all these vibed apps into something enterprise grade in the next 2 to 3 years.
Vibecodecleanup.com. I'm gonna be purchasing the domain after this. A little anecdote. My wife will kill me for telling you this, but when we were in labour with baby number 2, and the 2 midwives, I could see them. They were on an iPad, and this was about 15 minutes before baby arrived. And I probably shouldn't have been doing this, but I could see they're on, like, an NHS Wikipedia site. And they were searching for, like, information. And I was like, guys, do you use ChatGPT? And they're like, I've never used it. It blew my mind. I was like, the NHS doesn't have access to ChatGPT. It's like information source. It will give you the answer straight away. But there was this midwife, like, literally searching through this Wikipedia site. It looked like it was from the 1980s.
I can imagine, like, rifling through a book.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy to me that she'd never used it.
Index page.
And then the other lady in the room was like, oh, I've heard it makes things up. I was like, well, yeah, hallucinations were a thing. That obviously the models are improving. That's when my wife was like, stop talking, help me.
Hallucinating, come back here and help me. Let me hold you. Let me squeeze your hand. But it all worked out fine, didn't it? In the end, everything was good.
It did. So there we go.
And actually, on the hallucinations thing, I read something again. I think it was on X, maybe yesterday, that was talking about Claude and something again that had leaked from Claude, and because I think there's been some recent leaks on their code base as well, which was interesting. But this one was around the topic of hallucination, and also the proper full completion of work that you ask it to do. And I don't know if this is true or not, because it was on X. I don't know if it's been verified, but it was saying actually they figured out how to solve that to make sure that work gets 100% completed all the time and there's no mistakes in it. And they've deployed that fix internally. So if you work at Anthropic, you've got the fix and it's 100% completion every time, but it's costly and it takes credits. And so they haven't deployed it externally. And I actually think that the hallucination topic, I don't know the technical details behind it, but I think I can imagine that it is connected to how much effort the machines or the tech is going through to get to the answer, right? Because it's much easier to hallucinate something than it is to go find the real answer. And so I do wonder whether you'll find on the free versions of these tools that actually hallucination rates will be higher just because they won't have dialed it in as much because they'll be trying to save money on processing power. It might be my guess. So they'll be constantly trying to throttle it so that it's like just like as few hallucinations as possible that people don't get annoyed, but at the same time like enough that they can keep the cost base as low as it needs to be.
Yeah. Makes sense. Makes sense. My other thought on this is we're seeing a massive flock to Claude, especially by the enterprises. What happens when enterprises are locked in and Anthropic are just like, we're 10xing pricing? And you've built your code base on through Claude, you've built tech, your whole organization is embedded. Like the price of change is going to be difficult.
I totally agree. And I think this is a really interesting one for consumers as well, because if you spend I don't know, a year, 2 years using one particular platform, one system, and it knows about you, knows your history, knows your preferences, all those kind of things. Actually, switching is going to be a pain in the ass. So, like, you're not going to want to spend the time and effort to relearn. It'll be a bit like going from Android to Apple, right, or vice versa. It'll be that level of friction that will exist. So it'd be interesting to see how the different AI platforms try to navigate that. And there'll probably be some kind of like tooling that says, hey, use this to extract all of your data and insights from this one tool and put it back into this other one over here, which I think I remember using one of those for a BlackBerry once to get BlackBerry details into my Apple phone, and it was so painful that I vowed never to do it again, and now I'm still on Apple.
There you go. Final note on this slide, and this is again another anecdote from the market, is sales teams actually moving to a revenue per head target, which is what we're starting to see. So I've come from a sales background in the tech industry. Typically, you would see quotas rise by 10, 20, 30%, depending on performance, depending on the market. What tech teams are starting to implement now is a revenue per head target internally. And the reason being, you're seeing like 100 million ARR businesses being run by like 10 people. The obviously revenue per head is very high. Now with these bloated organizations, huge armies of sellers, the targets are going up pretty extensively. So they want to kind of compete with these AI native companies, make sure they're maximizing revenue at the head. We'll start to see more of that, and the downstream implication of that is we'll start to see more movement within the job market. People just given crazy high targets and just having to leave the organization just because they're not going to meet that demand. So yeah, there's going to be quite a bit of movement within the industry, I think. So yeah, one to watch.
Really interesting. And so, because I've never been in that space, but my understanding is you'd be given a quota of like how much you need to sell of a particular product or service in a given year, and then you're tracking it quarterly. That's how it normally works. And then it must be really uncomfortable actually for them to flip to this revenue per head target. In some instances, we got maybe some really well-paid people who didn't have particularly high targets. They're in quite a cushy job doing what they're doing. Maybe it's a relatively easy product or service to sell, and then now being tasked with maybe xing or 10xing the productivity of the seat that they've got, and then that just seemingly like being like an unworkable or untenable position to be in. And I wonder if that's also like a kind of a soft way of doing headcount reductions as well. I think in the companies that I've worked for, we'd see these changes come through. Maybe it was like return to the office, maybe it was something around expenses policy, maybe it was something around hours, whatever it might be, and it was just making the role just slightly less appealing than it was previously. And then that leads to some churn, leads to some people leaving. It's an interesting play though, right? Because you have to be careful about not making all of the good people leave. So that's the challenge. But maybe at this moment in time, actually, it's just about getting overall headcount down as low as possible, or seemingly that needs to be the game.
That's a good point. Kind of getting that organic churn without having to do the payouts. It's a good point. We're definitely going to see more of this. I think if you're a Salesforce or a big behemoth with huge sales teams, and then you've got a new entrant which is doing, like I said, in the hundreds of millions, but with a lean team that's like 10% the size of yours, then you're going to be looking at those numbers and wanting to do what they're doing, right? Cut costs. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. Awesome. So shifting gears from AI news into specific news around the industry that we work in, around the area of expertise that we have. We wanted to start off with AI search, which is an area we know very well, and start with this study which came out from Graphite. Super interesting study. What it is showing the growth of AI search in relation to traditional search engines. So this is looking at web visits, mobile app sessions across the top LLMs, typically the frontier models, so ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Perplexity, and Grok, and then using and looking at the search engines across the top 6 search engines, so Google, Bing, Yahoo, etc. What you can see on in the green line is that exponential growth in AI search on 25% of Google queries. I think what's been dramatic is over the last 12 months, it's just been upwards and pretty steep incline, right? So I think you put this in, Stephen. Obviously, the GEO, AEO is now a board level priority. I don't know whether you're seeing that across the board.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely on a lot of people's radars now, right? And I think what's really interesting about this chart, Chris, is you've got search engine visits, queries, however you want to describe it, across the top in that black line. And then you've got this explosion that you just described in AI search. But whilst the search engine visits have been coming down, they haven't come down in the same way that the AI search queries and visits have gone up. Something interesting is happening here, and I was having this conversation just yesterday actually on this topic, which is seemingly this behavior is additive. So it's not fully replacing the traditional search queries, it's on top. And I think there could be like a couple of different reasons why that could be the case. So first of all is like the utility. So actually there's more value, or it's like a better, let's say, place to go ask questions for richer answers in AI search. And actually that means maybe more questions are being asked, because maybe questions are being asked into AI search which weren't being asked into Google because they weren't going to give you what you wanted it to in the past. So there's that component. I think there's another component, which is, and I've definitely done this, found an answer to something in ChatGPT and then clipped it, the brand name or whatever, and then I've gone and Google searched it, haven't I? So like I've still triggered a Google search. So I think that behavior still exists as well. I think what's true about this graph is it's definitely not the end of Google search in the traditional sense, right? That's still very much there. It's still very much the largest share of search at the moment. And then AI search is on this absolute march of winning over people's usage, but actually isn't leading to a complete collapse in classic Google search. So I think for that reason, that explosive growth in AI search, that's one of the reasons why it's becoming a board level priority. I think a lot of people are realizing you can't ignore this. It's definitely something that a lot of consumers are using, and we need to figure out as brands, as companies, as people who sell products and services to the people who are using these tools, how can we make sure our brand is being mentioned in there? And there's a really funny example which probably resonates with a lot of people who have worked at large organizations, which is actually at Mars. There was a period last year when someone senior at the organization was on holiday, and while they were on holiday, they were using ChatGPT and they were asking it about the brands that we sell or we sold when I was there, and they were getting the wrong answers. And so, of course, that led to a whole load of emails that were fired off from wherever that person was on holiday to various different people in the organization to say, hey, we need to fix this. And of course, not quite so easy as just a single fix to make sure your brand's being represented in the right way. But yeah, increasingly important now, I think, for brands, companies, anyone selling a product to someone else, where that someone else is using one of these AI search platforms, you need to figure out how you can be visible inside of there.
Yeah, I think you're right. The pie's getting bigger, right? So the amount of queries is getting bigger, whether that's in traditional search or AI, like it's going from this to this. And the reason being is that people are using natural language. It's more conversational. They're asking more prompts, or what we define prompts within answer engines. So they're having a conversation with answer engines, which is creating more communication, more backward and forward. I take more of a punchy view at the black line. I think search engines, I think that line does this, and pretty quickly. And the reason being is that Google are transitioning to AI first. And we're starting to see it creep in already, right? AI overviews. You can now, within AI overviews, jump into AI mode directly. There's been a lot around WebGuide, which is a new form of the Google SERPs, which is much more interactive, layering in AI capabilities. So I think traditional SERP, the Google search engine, is going to seem very, very dated very quickly, which is why Google is starting to move into this new world. So
your bet is by the time we do the next one of these, then that black line's like totally nuked, and I'm more like slow bleed out guy, just like dribbles its way down to zero.
You're going slow death. I'm going like Acts to the artery. I made a prediction that within 3 months we will transition across to either some form of AI mode as default or web guide, which will just completely destroy rankings, traffic, and traditional SEO. I'm going to stick by that.
And presumably that, so then, so I'm not saying that won't happen. I think it could happen, but I think maybe the transition will be slower for two reasons. One is I think Google won't nuke the golden goose or whatever you call it, like the PPC engine that generates loads of revenue for them until they have the replacement figured out and the ads are running. So I think we need to see the propagation of ads through Google's AI ecosystem first. Then they'll try and switch everything over. And then the other thing I think that maybe means that it just is a little bit slower is just like human nature, like the way that we get locked into behaviors. I still sometimes find myself Googling stuff by accident just because of the almost muscle memory of doing it. And I'm sure there's millions and millions of other people out there who are doing the same thing. So I think for that reason, from my perspective, it's going to be a slightly slower process, but it's still happening in the next few years for sure.
I'll meet you in the middle. I'm going to stick with 3 months. I'm potentially wrong, but we'll see. But I think the key thing is you can see the direction of travel for Google is that ultimately the SERPs, keywords, rankings are just irrelevant now. So humans expect an answer style format. They like working within ChatGPT, within Claude, and just blue links are just irrelevant. We'll look back on this period as like, Dad, what the hell were you doing? That's like so archaic, but maybe not in 3 months. But I'm going to stick by it. I'm going to stick with it and see what happens.
Hey, Chris, just bringing it back to the last couple of bits of industry news that we're going to cover in this pod today. So there's the Amazon piece on Perplexity, which is really interesting that I'll say a few words on, and then Shopify and agentic commerce, because there's been a little bit of like back and forth on that too, which is I think caused a bit of confusion, but also hot debate about whether this agentic shopping, let's say, evolution is going to play out the way we expect it to. But on Amazon first, so this one's really funny, I think, which is Amazon's website, so Amazon.com or .co.uk or wherever you shop, is getting crawled by Perplexity, and Perplexity is pulling that information back into the Perplexity app and then allowing people to actually check out and buy products. And Amazon absolutely do not want that to happen. So they've gone to the courts in the US and said, you're breaching our terms of service, we're blocking you. And the first I'm not a legal expert, but the first court order was they won, but actually it was upheld, I think. I'm not sure how the US system works. So actually it's still a little bit pending what the answer is. Now, the really funny part of it is that Amazon are doing the opposite to other retailers. So with Rufus, there's an option called Buy For Me or Shop Now, it's also been named as. And if you can't find the thing you're looking for on Amazon, goes and finds it for you somewhere else on the internet from another retailer or a brand website, and it allows you to make that purchase directly from the Amazon app. So they're blocking Perplexity from doing it to them, and in parallel, they're doing it to everyone else. And I saw something really interesting just today as well, which was eBay have come up with a new policy, which is on eBay, they're not going to allow anyone to do it apart from Google. So they've got a slightly different approach to it. I'm not sure eBay is a big player anymore. They're all deciding, who's doing what and who they're going to allow onto their websites. And this, for me, is just a battle for owning the consumer. We talked earlier about the AI agents being sticky for us. So like once something knows our preferences, it's going to be difficult to get it to change. And I think all these big retailers and AI tools are realizing the same thing, which is once you've got the consumer locked into your app, like it's going to be really difficult for them or it's going to be really sticky for them to move and go somewhere else. So they want to be the app where you find and discover and buy everything, because if they can be that app, then that will be the most valuable one. And big battle on at the moment with retail. So Amazon desperately trying to stop other apps and other AI tools coming onto their site and scanning it and allowing people to check out. Meanwhile, doing the same thing to the other retailers out there as well at the same time, which, I find it obviously quite funny, but be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Are they adding a margin as well? Are they buying it from somewhere else and then adding 10% or whatever it may be?
Actually, do you know what? I don't know the answer to that at the moment. And I think maybe at the beginning they're not gonna do that and just do it as a pass through. Maybe, I'm not sure. Certainly, we know with Shopify, their model was that they were going to charge a fee for doing the agentic checkout inside of their platform, and that was going to be 4%. Which, if you compare it to the Amazon seller fees, which are like 15%, actually that's like it's pretty reasonable. But again, like we talked about with Anthropic, if you become the default platform, then of course at that point in time you're the monopoly and you can charge whatever you want. So my guess is they maybe start out with like quite low fees, and then over time they just start to squeeze everybody by cranking them up. So that's probably how it plays out. And then the Shopify story is somewhat connected to it, right? Which is so ChatGPT obviously came out and said, they had their shopping protocol, which was going to allow people to buy inside the app, and it didn't really stick, and it was a bit complicated. And I think the reality is, retail is hard, and being the merchant of record, being the place where the transaction happens, and the sort of where the payment transfer goes through, so that merchant of record piece is actually a bit complicated. And I think what's really interesting is, Shopify, they pretty much run all of the D2C websites around the world now. I know there's other ones, but like they're the predominant player. And what you've got is this really interesting ecosystem where Shopify can say, okay, well, we'll do all of the hard work. We've got all the tech stack. We've got all of the brands who are selling on our platform, and we can actually just make it real easy for people to find and browse and discover our products inside these AI tools, and then permission the checkout to happen through our technology. And so I think really interesting one from Shopify's angle to go all in on the agentic piece. And then the bit that has always, or was a piece of friction, right, when you went to a new website to buy something, was I need to put in my card details, I need to put in my address, blah, blah, blah. And it was a bit of effort, which is why Amazon did so well being the everything store, because you had all your details saved, you had the payment details there, and it was just one click to make a purchase. But now with the Shop app, you can obviously save your card details, and it doesn't matter whose store you're on. As long as it's a Shopify-based store, you can click and check out. I think that technology, that like removal of friction, is something that they're just then going to bring to agentic commerce, and it's going to make everything super easy. So I'd be surprised if it doesn't really take off actually through their network and their ecosystem.
Yeah, makes sense. Who do you think the end winner is? Because obviously we're seeing new entrants into agentic commerce daily. It seems like obviously Meta coming in. You've got Google, you've got ChatGPT, and others making plays in this space. Like, how do you think? Do you think there's going to be like a monopoly? Do you think it will be expanded to maybe 4 or 5 key winners, and then the rest is long tail?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how this played out with, I guess, the social and retail media evolutions that we've seen over the last maybe decades. Google really wanted to own that and built Google Shopping, right? Great tool, really interesting way for people to find, I guess, good prices on products. That was what really worked well for Google Shopping, is just that price transparency and comparison. Still ultimately those people had to click through and go to the retailer websites to make the purchases. Therein was the sort of friction layer that existed, and why it never really became like a sort of default channel to shop. It was just like a pathway into going to shop and finding a good price on something. And then I think when I think back to like the social evolution, I remember when Meta, or Facebook as it was called back then, said, hey, we're going to bring shopping cards into Facebook, and you're going to be able to sell all your products inside of Facebook. Actually, they did a partnership with Shopify to allow those shopping cards to exist inside of Facebook. And it just didn't happen, right? It didn't work. No one buys stuff inside of Facebook, although there is Facebook Marketplace, right, which is slightly different. But what did happen, what evolution we did see, is an absolute shit ton of people buy stuff through Instagram today. Same is true of TikTok as well. So like that social commerce evolution just came about in a different way from how it was maybe thought about or designed at the very beginning by Facebook. The same thing is going to be true of agentic. ChatGPT envisaged this world where people would search, discover, and buy stuff inside of their app. And actually, reality is consumers aren't really ready for that, and that's not how it's seemingly playing out at the moment. It's more likely to be some kind of integration with Shopify. You search, you discover a product, but then you go through to the actual Shopify to make the purchase and click and check out. So I don't think it's locked yet how the ecosystem is going to evolve for consumers, but certainly something is going to happen in this space where people will be buying lots of things in an agentic way over the course of the next 12 to 18 months, or certainly that's what I think is going to happen.
Yeah, agreed. I think you're right, and we're seeing with some of our brands we're working with, they're definitely leaning into this, but I don't think the consumers have caught up with it in terms of their own usage. But you can quite easily see the direction of travel. If you can, as a consumer, search for products, compare prices, get all of the information on that product, which is this product relevant for me based upon what you know? And then you're buying it at the cheapest price across the entire web, then it's going to be a bit of a game changer.
Yeah, that price bit's really interesting, right? Because I think the internet was fantastic for price transparency. Pre-internet, you may have gone and visited a couple of stores to see what the price is, but you're certainly not looking across the whole nation or local area that you live in. And then the internet came along and created that price transparency. I saw something really interesting at a conference around the products that ChatGPT recommends, actually. And on average, the prices of the products they recommend were 8% higher. So it wasn't necessarily not recommending the cheapest place to buy the individual product. It's just the recommendations in general were for higher priced products. Yeah, so there's a couple of different reasons why that might be true. Could be, they're indexing towards higher price point products because of the commission structure. So there's like an incentive for them to recommend higher priced products, not necessarily the highest priced product in the market, but just higher priced products in general. And then I think the other reason could be, well, if your selection criteria is about a whole different set of attributes or constraints around the product that you need, actually you're not necessarily saying, hey, give me the cheapest priced product there is in this category. You're saying, hey, I want one that's, I know, black, this size,
Delivery.
yeah, all of those different things. And so it's taking all of those things into consideration, whereas in the past a lot of the e-commerce shopping tools were just really about, can we scrape the web and find the cheapest price that's out there. So I think the price transparency bit, hopefully that doesn't go away. Like, hopefully we don't end up with like inflated prices on these platforms. I don't think that will happen. I think it's just that there'll be lots of other considerations that the tools or the AI technology will be trying to consider when it recommends the product to you. And then again, on this idea of like, will agentic commerce take over? I think there's, if you think back to when e-commerce kind of exploded in the early 2000s and you had the start of Amazon in, I guess, 1996. Well, when that happened, everyone got very excited about it at the beginning and we had the dot-com bust and boom, or boom and bust. But physical retail didn't go anywhere. Like, it's still a large share of retail overall. And so I think the same thing's true now. Like, we might be getting a bit hypey in the agentic space, but when it does take off, and it will, it's not going to fully replace e-commerce, and it's not going to fully replace physical retail. Like, those two things will still be there. We'll want to go to regular old school classical websites and buy things in the same way that we still like going to physical stores to buy things as well. It's just that there'll be another channel, another way of shopping, which will be this agentic methodology, and it'll work really well for some categories and less well for others, is my expectation.
Yeah, definitely. I think the obviously the web MCP that came out from Google recently, and the information behind that, and technically how you configure your sites to make it ready for agentic transactions or agents to obviously traverse your website, pull in the relevant information, and then visualize that somewhere, is a great vision. But it often forgets that users like going to websites, like looking at products, like thinking about where to spend their hard-earned dollars and pounds. They forget that that actual journey is part of the experience. So I can see that vision for more like easier transactions where there's no consideration. But if you're buying a car or whatever it may be, it's going to be that vision doesn't.
No, and then it probably becomes like a multi-touch journey, right? Which is on those more considered purchases like a car, you're going to go and do your research with a model. So you're going to go and ask Claude or ChatGPT, what would it recommend based on a load of different constraints, but you're not going to buy it in the app. You're going to take the model name, model number, description of the car. You're going to go maybe Google search it, look at it on the brand website, on the car manufacturer's website. Then you're going to go to a showroom. You're going to get in the car. You're going to drive the car. You're going to see if they like the car. And then you're going to make the purchase somewhere, which may be in person with the sales associate, or might be online, or maybe even go back to ChatGPT. So there'll be like a whole flow of, let's say, consumer interactions with the models as part of that purchase, like fully permissioned agentic commerce where you don't go to a website and you don't go and see something physically in a store. Yeah, probably more routine purchases, probably like low risk purchases. Maybe I can see it in the space of like, hey, I've got this problem. I don't know. My kid won't sleep at the moment. I want a better light for their room. I don't really care what the light looks like or what it does. I just want it to come on at a certain time and go off at another time. Like, I'll just put those constraints into ChatGPT and just tell it to buy it for me if it's below 50 quid, because I don't care what the brand is. I just want that thing to solve the problem that I've got. So I can see those kind of transactions happening fully agentically without the need to go to a website or see something in a store.
Weekly shop, commodities. I think travel is a super interesting space, just like having your agent constantly tracking price updates on an hourly basis for flights, holidays, like stuff like that's going to be a game changer.
Anything where it's like, it's more of a chore than a pleasure. If it's a chore to shop that thing, if it takes some mental load, effort, energy to do it, and you can delegate that to a model, then people will do that. If it's like a pleasurable experience to shop something, hey, I'm going to go buy a new jacket and I really want to try on different styles and have a look to see whether it fits me, and that's an experience in itself, then then you're going to go do that in person, or you're going to go to your favorite retailer's website and check it out there instead. So, yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see which categories goes first. It reminds me though of Amazon and books, right? So Bezos started out with books just because like really simple to store them, really easy to categorize them, really easy to post them through people's letterboxes. So like it was just like the best category to start in. And I've not yet figured out what's the best category for AI search and agentic, but I do think that a category that's a pain in the ass to shop, and there's lots of confusion around models and comparisons for price reasons, is white goods. So I can see white goods being like a space where agentically it might get heavily disrupted. I need a new washing machine. I want it to be this size. I want it to be able to handle this load. And then across all the different retailers, they have different codes for the products because they don't want you to be able to compare prices. And there's a Black Friday washing machine, which is exactly the same as not a Black Friday washing machine, but it's £1,500 more expensive, so they can discount it. All this kind of stuff, I think actually might get massively disrupted by agentic. So that's my bet actually, is that a white goods manufacturer, a white goods retailer gets smoked in the next 3 months in the same way that you think the Google searches are going to decline as well.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, we'll hold you to that. I've actually got a tracker of setup of new retailers that are joining or setting up agentic ecom and ChatGPT. So Walmart came out, now setting up an app in Sephora, just recently launched within ChatGPT. Carrefour, which is huge in the European market, are doing the same. So I'm keeping track of who's coming in, who's coming out, who's then setting up applications in ChatGPT, or what that landscape looks like. So it's one to keep a track of because there's a lot of movement.
Absolutely. Sounds like a good topic for our next podcast.
There you go. We'll cover it off. Sounds good. Awesome. Well, with that, guys, I hope you enjoyed episode one of the Agent Economy, and more to come. We're looking to release these on a bi-weekly cadence. We'll see. But yeah, until next time, speak to you then.